Hey, Waypoint. Wanted to do a unique welcome this morning. I'm going to use my iPad and draw a little bit for you, but I want to just illustrate some of the ways in which you can stay connected to our community during this time. And I'm going to start with the Waypoint logo. It's kind of a crossroads and has that middle part with kind of four roads going out. And I want to just illustrate some ways you can stay connected. The first I would say is kind of what you're doing right now, probably. You're taking a look at YouTube or you're on Facebook Live. Or maybe you're listening to a podcast. And that really is one of the primary ways that you can stay connected during this time of quarantine, is to take a look at what we're doing in terms of social media. Instagram is included in that. We've got some great stuff on Instagram, pictures and verses. So that's one of the great ways you can stay connected coming out of what we're coming out of. Number two is home groups. And we've got home groups popping up all the time, even right now. And some of those are basically just going to somebody's home and meeting in the home. Some of them are not meeting in the home, but they're meeting outside, which is fine. And some of them are just getting together at all different places. And the point of all this is, whatever your comfort level is, if you need to be touching elbows, if you need to be wearing your mask, if you need to be staying socially distant from somebody 6 feet away, just know that we're doing that, and that there's a home group or a group that's meeting that will provide you some security and safety in terms of your health, but also the connection that we need as a community. So encourage you to do that. The other thing I'd mention is Brown Bag Bible Study. It's a Zoom link that comes out on Wednesdays, and we meet on Fridays at 12. And that is a fun group. We're going through the book of Jonah right now, Brown Bag Bible Study, and invite you to join us for that. Number three, emails. Brad does a great job collecting information and collecting it and sending it out to you guys on Wednesdays and Saturdays. It comes from info@waypointcommunity.org. I'm going to just shorthand that for time's sake. So info@waypointcommunity.org, and you may want to put that into your contact list. In those emails, there is something that Katie does for kids, and you can check that stuff out. There's stuff about events that are coming up and any other announcements that you need to hear. So I promise you that I'm not going to say anything about this to everybody, but we know from the stats that you're not reading all the way through the emails. We're not reading them. That's okay. But just want you to know there's a ton of stuff in those emails that's worth looking at. All right. So number four, events. Praise and prayer on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. has been an awesome thing for our community during this whole COVID season. And want to encourage you that we're still doing that Wednesdays on Zoom at 8 p.m. Email has the link. And I want to encourage you to come to that. It's been a great time to just share burdens and share joys with one another. And the other thing that's coming up, the next kind of event, is August 23rd. Right now, it's at 5 p.m. at Carmel Presbyterian. Again, we're going to meet outside, subject to change with some conversations with Queens and the governor, et cetera. But want you to know just those four things are going on, and would love for you to be able to join us for any of that stuff. So bottom line, there's a lot going on. One is YouTube, and you can take a look at YouTube, Facebook Live, et cetera. Two is home groups. Would love for you to get involved with something like that, or even join us on BBS via Zoom. Third is the email. Just check that stuff out. Some great stuff in there. And fourth is we've got a praise and prayer every week, and we've got August 23rd coming up. So with all of that in mind, I want to welcome you this morning. Thanks for being here, and welcome to worship.
Each tear that falls, and hears My name is Tom Klingman. My wife and I, Lori, have two wonderful young men, Thompson and Brady. They're both attending Auburn in the fall. We're really excited about the new experiences that they're going to have in Auburn. I was born and raised in Charlotte, and I grew up in a church down the street from Waypoint, where Waypoint is now, and feel very led to the gospel and the message that Waypoint delivers. We've all connected with the church, with the congregation, and most of all, we've reconnected with our faith. We're really excited about being a part of the congregation and look forward to watching Waypoint grow. I think the thing that I miss the most about Waypoint right now is grabbing a cup of coffee on Sunday morning and having a chance to talk to the congregation, seeing friends, catching up with people one-on-one. I know I'm not alone in that. I know that we're all going through this together, but I think that my family would probably agree with me in the fact that being around the congregation and being around other believers and just getting a chance to smile and shake hands and hug one another is a big miss, and we look forward to getting back to meeting on Sunday mornings again. I've been lucky enough to be paired up with a really great group of guys on Wednesday mornings. We've got a Bible study that we've been meeting for a little over 2 years. It's rooted in the Search Ministries ministry of the gospel, and it's been a great group of guys. There's 7 or 8 of us that meet every Wednesday morning. We've rotated the areas of where we've done it, so we've had some variety in where we meet, but the message is always the same. It's always based in Jesus, and we really we've all had our struggles. We've all had the ability to share with one another and really support one another with the things that the group has gone through. But for me and from a community standpoint and a fellowship standpoint, that Bible study means more to me than I ever thought that it could. And I've made some lifelong friends in there, and to know that when there's a problem or there's an issue that somebody's having, there's a text thread, there's a phone call, there's a meeting. We're there for one another, and I think that's what the fellowship of the Bible calls for. And I'm really excited about what God's doing in us and through us with this group of men.
So things are starting to get a little slow around the Berry household. That I thought I would grab my son's favorite book, the Guinness Book of World Records, and see if we could break some of those records this day. So I don't know if I've ever told you about my juggling ability, but if you'd go grab a stopwatch, I want you to time how long I can juggle these 3 basketballs for. Don't worry, I'll wait for you. All right, let's begin. You ready? And go. Well, clearly that's why I never told you about my juggling ability. Let's see what other records we could do. Let's see. Getting shot by the most Nerf bullets in under a minute. Yeah, no, I don't like that one either. Tell you what, I'm going to set my own record today. The longest sermon ever. You ready? Let's go. But you know where this Guinness Book of World Records comes from? It started back in 1955 when the owner of the Guinness Brewery, he got into an argument with a buddy of his. They were arguing over what bird is the fastest. And so he decided to start compiling a list of records of the greatest achievements and would publish it every year. And there's something about this greatness that drew our attention, that made this a world's bestseller. That we love greatness. We love to argue about who's the GOAT, the greatest of all time in sports. We long for greatness in our own lives. We long for greatness at our jobs or at school, or to be valedictorian, or to have a great marriage. There's something in us that wants to be great. I mean, Michael Scott, he claims to be the world's best boss. Over at playgrounds, you'll see dads show up with world's greatest dad dueling t-shirts. Ali claimed to be the greatest. R. Kelly wrote a song called The World's Greatest where he says, I am that little bit of hope. When my back's against the ropes, I can feel it. I'm the world's greatest. We long for greatness. Now, we also bemoan millennials these days, call them the kind of trophy generation, that their parents would reward them just for participation and tell them how special and great they are. And we kind of mock them and make fun of them as if this was something new, but quite honestly, this has been going on for generations. In fact, one of my favorite scriptures is Mark 9:33 and 34 that we're going to look at today. If you've got your Bible with you, open up and notice how even back in biblical times, these people would argue about who's the greatest. So Mark 9:33, it talks about the disciples, and it says they came to Capernaum. And when Jesus was in the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? So they had entered into this home, and you see the disciples kind of let their hair down. I love this story because you can feel just the natural humanness of the disciples. They've been arguing on the road, and Jesus confronts them and says, what were you arguing about? In verse 34, but they kept quiet. They were kind of ashamed about what they were talking about. They kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. The disciples were fighting for who was the greatest. They don't just do it once, though. Luke 22:24 tells us that a dispute rose among them while they're sitting at the table of the Lord's Supper. A dispute arose among them as to which one of them would be regarded as the greatest. They do it again. They're arguing who's going to be the best disciple, the world's greatest disciple. Now, one of my favorite moments is in Matthew 20:22 when you see the first helicopter parents show up. It says, then the mother of the Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons and kneeling down asked a favor of him. She said, grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. She wanted them to have seats of prominence alongside Jesus, to be at his right and his left. And Jesus looks at her and says, you don't know what you're asking. See, Zebedee's mom, she's kind of the first helicopter parent, sort of trying to protect and provide for her kids. I just finished a great book called How to Raise an Adult, where it talked about how a lot of our parenting strategies not only is this sort of helicoptering where we hover and try to advocate for our kids, but now we've turned into what they're calling lawnmower or snowplow parents, where we get out in front of our kids and we try to knock over and mow over any obstacles that might endanger our kids. In the book, they tell a funny story about a young 24-year-old kid who starts working at the investment banking. And he'd been working about 80 to 100 hours a week, and he would call his mom on the weekends just complaining about how hard he was working. And so his mother went and found the landline number to his boss, and over the weekend called him and began to complain about how many hours her son was working. Well, when the son showed up at the office on Monday morning, down in the lobby, he saw as he came in a box of all his belongings there. And on it, the boss had only written, ask your mom. See, we have this drive for greatness. We want to be great. We want our kids to be great. But Jesus, time after time after time, reminds us that the way of following Christ is not greatness, but it's actually sacrifice and surrender. What's fascinating about all three of those stories and arguments about greatness, they all occur immediately after Jesus had talked about the way of discipleship. That Jesus had said the way of discipleship is through sacrifice, through surrender, through picking up your cross and following him. It was about humility and seeking the least. And so it's almost as if the disciples, that they would listen to what Jesus said, but kind of dismiss it and want to be like, yeah, that's great. Great idea, Jesus. But who's the greatest? Who's your favorite? How quickly we really dismiss and don't allow Jesus' words to penetrate our hearts and to reshape us. That whenever Jesus talks about suffering, we want to change the subject and quickly get to our goodness and our greatness. But he says over and over and over again, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. But do we really allow those words to penetrate our hearts? I mean, listen to Jesus' words. He said, "But many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first." Later again, he says, "So the last will be first, and the first will be last." Again, he says, "If anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last, and the servant of all. But many who are first will be last, and the last first. Indeed, there are those who are last who will be first, and the first who will be last. Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. The greatest among you will be your servant. For he who is least among you, he is the greatest." Jesus is a little repetitive, isn't he? Saying it over and over again. Back when I was in seminary during a preaching class, one of our professors said, he said, "You're going to say the same thing 25 times over and over and over again. And just at the moment where you get frustrated and tired of saying it, you'll suddenly see a light bulb go off in the heart of your congregation." He said that because that's what happens for Jesus. Jesus says over and over and over again, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. And then he looks at one point at his disciple and says, "Why are y'all so dull? Why don't we get it?" Because the way of Jesus is a great reversal. What he did is he came and he brought a whole reversal. He flipped everything upside down that we thought we knew. And he said that the way of following him is to become least and last. And it goes counter to everything we think we should be about. I mean, really practically, what would it look like for you to live least this week? How could you live least? What if you actually let that car cut you off in traffic? What if rather than giving strategically, you gave sacrificially? You see, sacrificial giving means that it hurts. What if you would do something that might inconvenience you in order to help someone who might be struggling with anxiety and fear in this season? What would it look like to live least in this time? What if you asked questions of somebody else instead of talking about yourself? C.S. Lewis says that you'll discover when you meet a humble person, it's not that they think less of themselves, it's that they think about themselves less. What would it look like to live least in your marriage? What if you actually allowed your wife to interrupt you during the fourth quarter of a game so you could be there for her? How can you live least this week? Now, I know the concern and the fear we have is we think, well, Wes, if I do that, then who's going to look after me? Who's going to take care of me? I'll just be trampled upon. Well, Jesus says in Revelation 1, he says, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. And then at the end of Revelation, he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. See, the gospel promise of Jesus is that he's got us covered from the beginning to the end, from our greatness to our leastness. Jesus has our covered. That he came to show us the depth of his love. That the gospel which means good news, means that God came to redeem us. That those of us who are least become great. You see, in a way, the way the Bible almost is structured shows us that. That this good news requires bad news. This good news of grace requires the law. I mean, if you look at how the Bible is structured, there's the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the Old Testament is a story of God's people and the rules and the regulations and the expectations God demanded of them, and story after story of them falling short of the plan of God's glory for their lives. It's about their sin and their brokenness. It's about you and I's sin and our brokenness. But we need that Old Testament, story after story, to make the New Testament make sense. Because the New Testament then is a story of God's redemptive love, that because of our sin and our brokenness, he sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to show us the depth of his love. That the gospel, in essence, means that we are far more sinful than we would ever dare to imagine. But we're also far more loved by Jesus Christ than we could ever hope. And we need both the law and the grace for that good news to make sense. But for some of us, we try to separate one from the other. Maybe for some of us, we grew up in a household where all our parents talked about was kind of the angry God, the Old Testament God of wrath. And he almost set this God up as a moral police, that he would be watching you. And whatever you did, stepping out of line, would condemn you to hell. And so you got this picture of an angry God. And the easiest way to deal with that picture of God was to dismiss him and say, man, he can't even exist if that's true. Or for some of us, we want to get rid of that angry God and just focus on this God of grace and love. One of the first heresies in the church was called the Marcion controversy. And what it was this man Marcion, he had looked at the Old Testament God and he saw this God of anger and wrath and vengeance. And when he saw that, he said, that can't be the same God as the New Testament. And so he actually wanted to cut out the entire Old Testament to dismiss it. Many of us just want to dismiss this God of rules and expectations. But in doing so, we cheapen grace. And grace doesn't make sense unless we understand the depth of our sin and our brokenness. Paul in Romans 7 says, I know that nothing good lives in me, that is in my sinful nature. For what I desire to do is the good, but I cannot carry it out. No, what I do is not the good I desire to do. It is the evil that I do not want to do, I keep on doing. He expresses this inner struggle we have, how we keep falling short. But in that moment, that's where God's grace comes. It doesn't come with anger, but with love. This past week, one of my boys beautifully demonstrated it for me. We had gotten into an argument and a disagreement, and as he was getting ready to go to bed, I was sitting in my study when he came up to me and he just looked at me in the eye and he said, Dad, I lied to you. And in that moment, I wasn't angry with him. I was actually really proud of him. I was proud that he would come and confess his sin to me and allow me to show him grace and to hug him and to pray with him. You see, that's how God looks at us when we come and bring our sin, when we admit we have lied, when we admit that we have fallen short, that we are not as great as we think we are. God doesn't look at us with anger, but with the love of a gracious Father. You see, it's not until we realize our insignificance that we can become significant in the life of another person. We have to realize that we are least in order for God to become great in our lives. That's what's so silly about Mama Zebedee, is she totally misses the mission of Jesus Christ. She comes and asks that her sons would get this place of prominence that Jesus was entering heaven to sit at his right and his left on these thrones. But Jesus understood that those places were already secured for two other men. That when Jesus was about to enter heaven, he was going to go not to a throne of prominence, he was going to go onto a cross for our sin. And in that moment, on his right and his left, were two criminals, two men who had been convicted of a crime. That as Jesus was going into glory, he surrounded himself with the least, with the sinful, with the broken. And these two men, when they saw Christ in the middle, they reflect the way we can respond. One of two options. One of them decided to go with the crowds. And he mocked Jesus and he spat on him and he made fun of him. How could this be the Son of God? He's not that great. But the other one looked at him with humility and confessed his sin. And Jesus looked at the humble one and he said, "Truly I tell you this day, you will be with me in paradise." That the very first person to enter the gates of heaven wasn't the greatest, but the lowest of low, the humble man. That this is the man that Jesus says, you will get to be with me in paradise this day. He couldn't get down off the cross. He could go and do nothing to earn God's love. He couldn't go get baptized. He couldn't go start a mission trip. He couldn't start a Bible study. He couldn't start to tithe. There was nothing this man could do to earn God's love. It was simply a demonstration of God's grace upon him. That's why I believe the first person we're told that entered the gates of heaven was the lowest of low, to show us the greatness of God. You see, that is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in difficulties and persecutions. For when I am weak, then I am strong. For when I am the least, then God's grace is the greatest. Thanks be to God. Amen. So people of Waypoint, as you head into this week, here are your coordinates. How can you live least this week? What is one thing you could do to make yourself last? And may God the Father, the God who created you, who loves you more than you would ever dare to imagine, may He watch over you. And may Jesus Christ come and show you the way back to that Father is not through greatness, but through our leastness. And may the Holy Spirit bring you the peace you need this day and forevermore. Amen.